This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. I want to start off by thanking my monthly supporters, Joel W. and John G. Thank you so much for your support. If you find the podcast useful, helpful, or fun, I ask you to share it with other people. And as a part of that, if you could rate and review the podcast in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you get this podcast, that helps others find the podcast. On to today's show. My guest today is Leighann Lord. And as I point out in the beginning of our conversation together, trying to summarize Leighann's career is a daunting task. She is a stand-up comedian. She has specials on VH1, Comedy Central, HBO, Spotify, Pandora, and Amazon Prime. She has her own YouTube channel with her comedy. She is an author. She's written a book called Dict Jokes and Real Women Do It Standing Up, stories from the career of a very funny lady. I will have links in the show notes for Leighann's work. I highly recommend that you listen to her comedy specials and check out her books. In 2019, the American Humanist Association awarded her the Humanist Arts Award. She was a part of the New York City African Americans for Humanism outreach campaign that was sponsored by the Center for Inquiry. She has been on a number of podcasts. She's been on Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Where I caught her was on Point of Inquiry, where she is one of the co-hosts, and I think she's doing an amazing job there. And then she has her own podcast called People with Parents, where she talks about the role reversal of, as an adult, taking care of one's parents, as well as the grief of losing one's parents. It's a really profoundly important podcast that talks about secular grief and the difficulty of becoming the adult in the relationship with your parent. Leighann and I geek out quite a bit about comedy. Comedy has been a huge part of my life since I was a kid. It was obviously a part of hers as well. She just took it to the next level and does it on stage for a living. I point out that a lot of her comedy specials over the last years have all been very applicable and pertinent for our moment in time. And yet Leighann's style is not to hit you straight on, but rather to make you think deeply about these topical issues. Leighann and I do talk about Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd, but you'll notice that she is very kind to me in my naivete. I will have more to say about this in the final thoughts section. Here is my conversation with Leighann Lord. Leighann Lord, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time. Leighann, it's nearly impossible to summarize the entirety of your work. I'm going to take a quick stab at it. You're a comedian since the age of 10. You've traveled the world. You've been on Lifetime, VH1, Comedy Central, HBO. You've got a YouTube channel. You're an author, a book called Dict Jokes. I got to say that very carefully, which yes. I love. We'll talk about that, your mastery of the English language and what you're doing there. You also have Real Women Do It Standing Up, a story of your stand-up career. In 2019, the American Humanist Association gave you the Humanist Arts Award, which is awesome. You have been a part of the African Americans for Humanism outreach campaign. You've been on multiple podcasts, including Star Talk Radio with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I caught you on Point of Inquiry, which is where I started to hear about you. And then I just recently found that you also are the host of the People with Parents podcast. So to start things off, I'd like to hear about how you grew up. How was religion a part or not a part of your life? And tell me about your parents.
Oh, sure. It's interesting. I didn't really have a religious upbringing, not from the start. There was no initial indoctrination. I ended up going to Catholic school in third grade. And that only came about because my mom didn't feel I was getting a good education in public school and really just picked the best school in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, if the best school in the neighborhood had been a Wiccan school, I would have gone to Ravenclaw for my Harry Potter fans out there. So no, it just turned out to be a Catholic school. And I feel because I didn't get there until third grade, a year past the age of reason, I didn't have the same indoctrination. I didn't have the same reverence
Yeah.
for the material. And so I asked way more questions than the other 8-year-olds did.
Yes.
Like, excuse me, wait a minute, hang on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I stayed, but my Catholic school education went from 3rd grade all through high school, and the disenchantment grew. But in the beginning, I was all in. Okay, this is where I am. This is what I'm doing. So, we started going to church on Sundays. I became an altar girl. I then when I outgrew, the little, outfit you wear, I became a lector,
Yeah.
youth group. When you're there, when you're in the environment and you're a kid, you do what's there.
Sure.
But the questioning really started, I think, in high school, as any thinking teenager, when you're trying to,
Sure.
outrun the rules,
Yeah.
so to speak. And I found that, my dad, more so than my mom just wanted me to have, a stable, good upbringing. My father encouraged me to ask questions, to think, and he wasn't religious at all. He didn't go to church with us. Like, he's like, that wasn't his thing. But he didn't have to. He was just a naturally, amazingly good person. He was a good human being. Like, if you're looking for someone who doesn't, need religion to tell them how to be a decent person, that was my dad.
Yeah.
I understand my mom wanted me to have some sort of good educational foundation. My dad wanted me to be a good human.
Yeah.
And so that was a lovely combination. And I actually officially stopped going to church when I graduated high school and started college. And I remember very specifically, I was feeling like a hypocrite. I'm like, I don't believe this anymore. I love everybody here, but this doesn't feel right. And I remember telling my mom, and she was clearly disappointed, but she did something I thought at the time was really extraordinary. She's like, I'm going to have faith that me and your father raised you well enough to make your own decisions.
That's good parenting right there.
That's amazing parenting, because in retrospect, you want to control the little people that you make and tell them what to do. Yeah. But I didn't realize how great that was at the time until I heard other people's stories and how they were even afraid of telling their parents. And I was nervous, but I was never afraid. I didn't know what my mom would do, but I surely didn't expect that.
Yeah.
But I love that I got it. I love it even more looking back on seeing how valuable that was.
As a humanist now, do you think that you learned some important things from Catholic school? Is there value in having a religious education?
That's an interesting question. I used to say for years that if I had kids, I'd send them to Catholic school just so that they would have something to rebel against.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You need something. You need a struggle.
Yeah.
I do think, and I don't know if necessarily one gets this because they go to Catholic school or whatever religious educational training. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of cultural references that will pass you by if you don't get any sort of religious training. And that, again, it doesn't have to be in order to go to church, but it could be just to understand the culture, to understand what's going on around you, to get the literature references is important. But since I don't have kids, that would be moot right now. And my cat doesn't seem interested at all, unless I'm worshiping him.
Yes. The deep philosophical questions. Yes. So tell me then about how you got involved in humanist outreach.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I left the Catholic Church, and it was still a process. I feel like I did the paint by numbers way out of religion. It's like, okay, I'm not going to Catholic school, but I'll be spiritual.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. It was just so classic. And, at this point, but step by step, it was, spiritual. And then I'm looking at all other religions. I looked at, Buddhism. I looked at Baha'i. I was very, enraptured with the Baha'i faith until you get down to the nitty gritty of it. And there's this, I don't know, high council circle, this group of people who make all the decisions, and they're all men. And it's like, oh, it's like, I felt like somebody gave me this really pretty wrapped present, and then I opened it up and there was shit inside.
Yes. You're fine.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Please express yourself. Yeah.
I should have asked about FCC regulations ahead of time.
We're good.
But but yeah, no, I felt like it was this, oh, come on, not you guys too.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, wow, do we ever win in this? And so that's kind of how I got sort of pushed out. And I'm like, okay, so if I'm not religious and I'm not spiritual and I don't believe, you know, in anything of that sort, like, so what now? Not that I was looking for something to replace it, but I was like, are there other people in this space?
Yeah.
You know, and again, early days of the internet.
Yeah.
You know, which facilitated, you know, searching in it. You know, of course, I'm an English major, I'm a bookworm, you know, I'm like, oh, I gotta find a book for this. And I believe it was Alan's book. It was a collected essays of people of color, African Americans who had left their religion. And I was like, oh, other people have left? Like, what? And so I'm reading it like it's a Stephen King novel. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And I was so excited that I believe, I'm not sure if I found his email or his Twitter. This might have been pre-Twitter. And I reached out to him. I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you for writing this wonderful book. Where is everybody?
Yeah.
Like, where do I go now?
Yeah.
Because again, you think about the need for community is always there.
Yeah.
You know, the need, you know, even if you just hang out and, you know, have a glass of wine, it's like you want to have conversations with like-minded people or people who might give you some sort of guidance when you're new to something. And he pointed me to CFI Harlem, and CFI stands for the Center for Inquiry. And at the time they had a branch in Harlem, which was incredibly diverse. It was so wonderful. I remember showing up and I'm like, oh, hi, I just wanted to hug everybody. Like, can I touch you? And that's like completely inappropriate. This was before me too. And we would have these wonderful discussion groups. We would sit and just talk and not arguing, but just really wrestling with differences of opinion, you know, about religion, about society, about culture. It was very, very enriching and very, very exciting. And shortly, I won't even say I was there a year before CFI, the main branch of CFI, decided to they got a grant and they wanted to do a program, African Americans for Humanism.
Okay.
And it was, you know, in various cities around the country, and they were looking for the face for the New York City campaign. They say, hey, Leighann, do you want to do it? And sure.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it's kind of sad. I work in entertainment, and you almost never say no. It's like, oh yeah, do you want to walk on this fire pit and tell jokes? You know, we'll give you $5, and maybe a manager might see you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I don't mean to equate it that it was a horrible experience, but I'm always just primed to say yes to stuff. But it did seem interesting, even though looking back, I don't think I had enough street cred or like time in the movement yet. I had my discovery and my sincerity.
Yeah.
And so we went up to Buffalo, and I met Alex Jules, who lived in Texas at the time. Met Mandisa Thomas.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on Mark's last name. He was in DC. And it was like, oh my gosh, hi, you guys.
Yeah.
And I actually loved the theme of the campaign. We're not trying to run into churches and grab people out, because that doesn't work. You know, it wasn't about shaking a finger and convincing people. It was kind of like this, where we got to sit and sort of tell our stories, how we left the church or started asking questions. And it was really just to provide that safe space to let other people know, if you have doubts, you're not alone.
Yeah.
That's all it was. And you can't get any softer than that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's like an easy, it's like whatever's happening inside your head, you're not by yourself. You don't have to tell anybody. Just think about it. And I felt very, I guess, fortunate, because my campaign was in New York, and in a way it wasn't greeted with the level of hostility that, say, Alex Jules faced in Texas. You know, I mean, it was, you know, there was just visceral, you know, angry reactions, whereas people here were like, Leighann, what are you doing? What? Like, did I see you on a billboard? Like, what's happening here? Like, they really didn't care. They're like, what's humanism? Like, we all know you're human. What are you bragging? Like, what?
Yeah.
And I remember someone saw, because there was a billboard, there was a bus shelter ad, and there was like ads in the subway for like a while. And someone, I still don't remember who, took pictures of it. And this is so not pre-internet, but my mom was not on email or internet.
Yeah,
We took pictures and sent them to my mom.
Oh no.
My mom took the pictures, put them in a frame in the living room.
Oh, good for her.
And she said, "I'm so proud of you." What?
That's
This
awesome.
is so not most people's experiences. So,
Yeah.
So I sometimes hesitate when people say, "Are you doing outreach?" I mean, I was part of that campaign. Yes.
Sure.
I'm not running around the streets proselytizing. I feel like I'm trying to be me.
Yeah.
And if you want to have that conversation, we'll have that conversation. I don't argue anymore. Arguing was fun in college, just destroying someone's belief system and, merely skipping away to class, thinking that did something, and it didn't.
You're telling my story here. Like, that's kind of what this podcast is about. Is you've mentioned several things, trying to build some community, trying to say, hey, you're not alone. You're out there.
Mm-hmm.
This is normal. You're a normal person. This is perfectly normal. And then also just kind of being done with the whole debate culture thing, right?
Yeah,
like, let's move on. Let's talk about, let's wrestle with these deep questions. We don't need to yell at each other.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? I will admit, there was a time in my life when I thought that was fun.
Sure.
Yeah. I've read, Dawkins, I've listened to the podcast. I listen because once you get in, you're like deep in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it's exciting and to be informed. That's always the great part. But what is, I think you get to the point in your life where you realize nobody ever changes their opinion or even starts to think about your side of things when your finger's in their face.
Mm.
That's just not how humans work. And from very young, you're 3 years old, somebody puts a finger in your face, you get mad.
Yes.
No, that doesn't change. And so you would think as we get into our adulthood, into our mature years, that we figure out a better way to communicate with each other than the shouting.
Yeah.
But clearly I'm wrong given the state of the nation right now.
Oh, man. Part of the podcast is about people leaving the faith, having had some form of faith and then leaving it. And one of the first things is a very huge loss of community. Is there another layer then for the Black community in that the church seems to be even more intensely the center of the Black community? Do you think that's true? Or?
Yeah, well, in general, yes. For me, it's a little different because I was Catholic, and Black Catholicism is smaller in terms of numbers than, Black Christianity at large, whether that be Baptist or Protestant or Holy Roller. I was the girl that was used to church on Sunday, 50 minutes, we're out for football.
Yeah.
Whether or not you watch football or not, you just do. You could clock it. It wasn't a huge time investment.
Sure.
Even if you were on a church committee afterwards, you still had your life. It wasn't all consuming. It was very shocking to me because I do have a branch of my family that's super, super, super religious.
Okay.
We are so not close. But people get married, people die, you show up at events, and, the length of service was just outrageous. I'm getting ready to go because you're physically timed for, okay, it's about an hour, it's time to go, and nobody else is looking like they're leaving.
Yeah.
The volume, the shout, like, why are we shouting? Why do you think God is deaf? Like, what is happening? So it was a very different experience. And because it wasn't an all-consuming experience, I don't think I had the same sense of loss of community.
Okay.
Because school, I went to Catholic school, so I was destined to lose some of those friends anyway, because you grow up, you go to high school, you go to college. The people in church were like, I don't know, aunts and uncles. It wasn't, some of them clearly I loved, and they thought the world of me and looked out for me, and vice versa. But, at that time in my life, I was, you're late teens, early 20s, you're just ready to rip and run. You're not thinking about family. You're thinking about, where's the next party? That doesn't come back around until you get a little bit of seasoning, I'd like to say.
Yeah, I hear you. So again, another idea of this podcast is trying to bring humanity to humanism. In that, I think humanism, even the word, conjures up pictures of tweed wearing professors in Oxford. Why I immediately wanted to talk to you after hearing you on Point of Inquiry is like, you were just a breath of fresh air of like, this is a normal person. And this is, you know, boots on the ground humanism. One of those topics is about grief. And so it turns out that your podcast about people with parents has really addressed grief. And I think that's a topic that secular people, we kind of ignore sometimes, or we don't, or maybe not ignore, but we just don't delve into it enough. So how has that been for you to kind of publicly grieve your father and talk about that role reversal with your parents?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning the podcast and asking about that. And for anybody that doesn't know, podcast is called People with Parents, and it's about the role reversal between adult children and aging parents. And interestingly enough, when I started the podcast, it was all about that struggle. You know, like, they're getting older. What's happening? Why am I in charge? What's going on here? Why are you on so many medications? No, I don't know where your slippers are. It was just this, you know, crazy world that I kept getting sucked into with old people, never realizing, because this is me, where the end game was. Like, where are we headed here? And that, you know, reason, season, lifetime, not everything is going to last a lifetime. This is a season. And then that season is going to end, and there's going to be some loss. And I guess everybody knew it but me, because I was too deep in it. And that's when I, you know, sort of learned that we as I can't say the world, I don't know, you know, world grieving cultures, but here in America, we really don't talk about grief. You know, I mean, everybody's there for you week one. You know, and most of them are saying the absolute wrong thing.
Yes.
You know, and so while you're trying to grieve, you're also busy being angry. Like, what? What did you just say? What do you mean a better place? He's not in Disney World. What are you saying? You know? And then dealing with, we talked a little bit about this off air, that when you are atheist or in the secular community, and your understanding is you are never seeing this person again. You're not going to cross the rainbow bridge and see your dogs and cats and parents again. And wow, that impact, like, this is final. And how do you grieve that? How do you live with that? And I didn't realize I was so grieving out loud. but I mean, you go back to the, you know, the things I've posted over the year, and it's just been gut wrenching. But that allowed other people to acknowledge their grief as well, because people who are grieving don't feel seen. You know, they really feel like, if I say this out loud, people will be uncomfortable, or people won't want to talk to me, or I'm all alone in this. And sometimes you are, you know, depending on how fresh the loss is or what's going on. Other times, once you reach out, you know, you figure out that you're not. Because, you know, people like to give the example, you know, there's two kinds of people in the world. And I think that fits here too. There are people who haven't lost someone. And then there are people who have. And that can happen at any age, you know, which I find horrifying. Like, I would be a completely different person had I lost my dad if I were a teenager or a young woman in her 20s. You know, I had my dad for a good long time. But then you realize it's never enough time. And that's if you have a good relationship. If you have a bad relationship, they couldn't go faster. You know, it's like, when is the funeral? When can I give me an invitation so I can show up? You know, but we had a good relationship. And so, you know, his loss, even though he when he passed, I think he was 84, but he kept lying about his age. But he wasn't actually lying. He was just forgetting how old he was. And he would say he was a year older than he was. And I'm like, Dad, if you're going to lie about your age, at least say like you're 70. I'm like, come on. I think you're missing the point here completely.
I had mentioned that I lost my mom in 2016, which was about a year after I left the faith. And first, let me just say, I'm sorry. I always say to people, lo siento, in Spanish, means I feel it. Like, I feel, I feel your pain. And just that hitting you of a ton of bricks of, I don't get to see this person who I love again.
Right.
My relationship was much more complicated than it sounds like you and your parents. So I was a little on that side of, okay, maybe it's time.
I'm laughing because I love the dark humor of it. I really do.
That's a whole other soap opera story, but we won't get into that. But yeah, I think that it is something that we don't talk about enough. And I just want to thank you for doing so publicly. And I think that is really important.
I mean, honestly, people feel so isolated when that happens. Like you feel like you're the only person in the whole world, and you're not, clearly. But man, those feelings can be, like you said, complicated and isolating. Like I immediately signed up for grief counseling. Mm-hmm. Immediately, because my dad was in hospice. He had been moved to hospice, and people get afraid of that term. It doesn't always mean it's the end, because my mom was in hospice for a little while and then she's out.
Okay.
Because she got better. They got her, a little bit more stable. But my dad went in and he didn't last for 24 hours. Like the little intro speech they gave me was still fresh in my head. They gave me a pamphlet and they're explaining stuff. And they're like, well, yes, you get counseling, and, about 3 months in, down the road, we'll contact you. I contacted them the next day. And I said, I can't wait, because I had suffered quite a few family losses and friend losses up to that point. And I had no idea what I was running on. And if you don't know what you're running on, you don't know when it's going to run out.
Yeah.
And I said, I need help. And they were like, wow, no one ever calls. And I am like, when's the first meeting? Like,
yes.
Yeah, no, I took a very proactive stance to my mental health. And the grief counseling is different from regular counseling. I was already in that, just trying to, deal with adulthood. Because I don't know about you, this is not what I expected. Not what I expected at all. It's like, I want my money back. This is an awful ride.
Adulting is hard, yes.
Yes, it is. And so I was doing that, wrestling with that. And then the pandemic hit. I'm like, oh, well, screw it.
Yeah.
But I mention that because people don't even know sometimes that the grief counseling is a thing, that there are counselors that actually specialize in that.
Right.
Because you might feel that, you're whining to your friends, or your friends don't understand. And maybe sometimes they don't. And they may not know how to handle what you're feeling and how you're feeling it, other than to pat you on the back and go, hey, let's go eat something. Okay. No, that's not, we don't, feed the grief that way. And so there's no shame in knowing that this is big.
Yeah.
The bigger the love, the bigger the grief, the bigger the loss. And, get some help specifically for that. Now, whether that's therapy, whether that's, I'm a bookworm. I dived into books.
Yeah.
There have been a few books written on this subject that explores the nature of grief and why we do it so badly. And I remember once I read that, I went from being angry at people for not saying and doing the right things to being compassionate with the fact that they were never taught how to do it. And the fact for a long time that I didn't know how. I probably said some terrible things to people trying to be comforting. And if there's an upside, it's that my level of awareness and compassion have been raised for other people who come to this side of life.
You grow some empathy very quickly.
Oh, yes. Yes. And if you don't, that's your test to know if you're a psychopath.
Yes.
If you were on the fence and you weren't sure, like, am I a psychopath? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
No empathy.
Well, let's see. So we've tackled death.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We tackled it. We wrestled it to the ground.
That's
we made
right,
it cry, uncle.
So what else is happening in the world? There are terrible, terrible things happening in the world right now. And I definitely did want to get your perspective on the moment in time that we're in.
Oh.
There seems to be, in the tragedy, in this horror show of pain and suffering in the Black community, the loss of life, the just horrid display of violence from police departments and what have you, there is some glimmer of hope. Am I wrong in seeing that people are reacting to this and responding in a way that maybe they haven't in the past? What's your perspective on that?
Well, first of all, I love your optimism.
Yeah.
I hate to say, as you get a little older, you get a little bit more jaded.
Sure.
And it always feels different. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure it felt different in the 60s. People were responding in ways they never responded before, and then energy dissipated, or the gains that you thought you had were eroded by people who inexplicably have no empathy or compassion, or their goal is power and subjugation or supremacy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, yes, seeing the number of people, the diversity of people, the youth of people out here in the streets, I wish they were all wearing masks, but that's a whole nother deal. Yes. Most of them are wearing masks, most of them. And I hate to nitpick, but COVID, please, hashtag don't kill grandma.
Yes.
So that is rousing. And the fact that this seems to have ignited a fire, not just nationally, but globally. And, part of it might be, inspired by George Floyd, but, this momentum has picked up and moved around the world, and people are marrying it with their own concerns locally. The way that abuse or abuse of power or, subjugation is happening on their soil. So I do think this is really an interesting time, and my heart really wants to believe that this energy will be the catalyst for real and substantive change.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I am a casual student of history. People don't give up power.
Yeah.
And there is something about human beings, perhaps a design flaw. Please don't take that literally, because we can have the design conversation. It's just to facilitate, the example. But
yes.
there is something in us. Wow, we just like to be above people, and I really wish we could just take a year off. Okay, no weapons, no wars, none of that. We are going to develop human potential and weed out that thing, that tribalism thing that's holding us back. I wish we had the time for that. Maybe that's what the pandemic is offering. Time off to work on us, to both keep us alive and then raise us to a higher level of consciousness.
Do you think that humanism has anything to offer here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When no one out there, on the streets, no one out there who's actually working on legislation or real concrete plans, when they say defund the police, what does that mean? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Here's my manifesto. Yeah. I mean, there are people out there who really, they're not just yelling slogans and waving around poster board. They have real plans and have been working on this for ages.
Yeah.
And nowhere in there did anybody say, hey, before I talk to you about my great idea, what religion are you? Nobody's asking that. What they are doing, I believe, is the work and the ideal of humanism, which is human beings realizing that they have a stake. It's like, listen, you want to pray at night, you want to light a candle, that's great. We still gonna have to get in here and do this work. To me, that's humanism. That's human beings trying to be better humans, actually doing the work. I don't know what's more humanist than that. I really don't. And they may not even call it that.
Amen is all I have to say to that.
Is it legal? Can we say that? Is that?
Yeah, I think I can. Yeah. So now I want to talk about comedy a little bit. You say that you started comedy at 10 years old. Tell me about that decision.
No.
When did you know you loved comedy, and how did you start?
Yeah, no, I didn't start at 10. It's just when I actually add up all the numbers and do the math. Ooh, it's so hurtful. I don't know how I got here. Like, wow, cut me in half and count my rings. This is terrible. There are several parts to this story, but I did theater in college. And man, when you get bitten by the theater bug, it's just, there's no real cure for that. So I loved being on stage. I loved acting, loved singing, loved dancing, even though I wasn't that good at singing. You just put me in the chorus, I'll be fine. Growing up, before that, I was sort of, believe it or not, the class clown.
I can't believe that. That is shocking.
Well, I will tell you why. I was a really smart, nerdy, funny-looking kid. I got picked on all the time. It was, the classic, glasses, braces, really skinny. And I got sick of it. And I said, I really approached it very logically. I should have known I'd be a future atheist. I approached it very logically. What can I do to get them to stop picking on me? What is that thing? Because I still had to do my work. I couldn't just suddenly slack off and be a D student. And I said, well, maybe if I poke fun at myself first, if I get ahead of the joke, it takes the wind out of their sails. They think I'm funny and I can still go on with my life. I made that decision in 6th grade. Like, it was just that clear. Like, okay, yes, this will be my battle plan for the rest of junior high. And it worked. If you knew me back then, I was that kid. But I still did my work. The teachers still loved me. And so that carried me into, high school and college. And then the other piece of it is I loved watching comedy on television.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm flipping channels and there was a brick wall and a microphone, I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
Even when I didn't even always understand it. Like, because the adults did comedy back then. And it's like, what are they talking about? What? But there was still something magical about it. That rhythm, that punchline, that laughter, that energy. It just grabbed me. And then the other piece is that I come from a very funny family. My parents, not always intentionally, but mostly were hilarious. They were great storytellers. I grew up, it's not a perfect upbringing, but I grew up with a lot of love and laughter in my house. So, you add up all those things, and my degree was in journalism and creative writing, so there was this stew of my life that was just being created and mixed that, when I was very disenchanted with my corporate life, and I said I want to do something else, but I don't know what, many things popped in. Like, I should have had an MFA in creative writing, but I didn't go. And I almost went for my master's in graphic design. But right in the middle of that, stand-up reasserted itself as a possibility, not just as something to watch and enjoy, but something that I was now adult enough and tall enough, you must be this tall, to do this ride, to do. And man, from my first time on stage, I haven't looked back.
Man, I totally relate to, watching comedy when I was very young, way too young.
Way too young. That's how they get us.
My grandparents had HBO when I was super young. So I was watching Richard Pryor and George Carlin and Robin Williams. And I was like, I don't know what this cocaine is, but man, they seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah. Note to self, do not set self on fire.
Yes, exactly. So I have always loved comedy. And I think the brilliance of comedy is that you as comedians, you're able to observe humanity and communicate that back. You're holding up a mirror of like, this is what you're like. This is how you think, in a way that can be just shocking and revelatory.
Yes.
And one of the topics I want to talk to you about is, I think it's also really an amazing tool for breaking through prejudice, people's cognitive biases, all those kinds of things. You can get people to see the break in the way that they're thinking.
I think it's the sound of music. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah.
And there are things that you can say as a comedian, as the unofficial town crier, that other people might know or might know subconsciously, and they are not empowered to say so out loud. But we can get on stage, microphone in hand, and we are empowered to say, say that the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
And everybody goes, yeah, you're right. I'm so glad you said that. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it makes you sort of unfit for other work.
Okay.
You kind of can't go back in the office.
The corporate thing doesn't work anymore.
No, it really doesn't, because you're going to be the one sitting in the meeting going, excuse me. Or in my case, my face, when I first started, people kept telling me about my face and I didn't understand what they meant. And it took me time to figure out that I had these facial expressions from what I was talking about or the audience was reacting to, and that was helping to sell the joke.
Yeah.
Or paint the picture. And so it is a wonderful tool on stage. It is horrible off stage in relationships because my face is going to be saying things that my inside voice would not say out loud. I'm like,
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't bring that to the meeting.
Yeah. Your face doesn't lie. Yeah.
No, the face doesn't lie. So
Yeah.
that's the only great part about Zoom, was where you could just sort of, take your video off.
Yes.
Like, did he really say that? That is no.
So with a nod to Chris Rock, who are your top 5 comedic influences?
Oh, wow. 5. Wow, that's a lot. Well, I was definitely going to say earlier, I am very clearly and firmly made from the George Carlin school of comedy. He was at the time the most prolific, and he was definitely the one that spoke truth to power.
Yeah.
With just killer punchlines. Like, he would do a bit and you'd be like, well, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Like what he said. I loved that what he did. He talked about, really serious things in such a funny way that got everybody laughing. And I feel once you're laughing at something that's absolutely absurd and ridiculous, you can see the absurdity once you're able to laugh at it.
Yeah.
Once you unclench, the sphincter, you just laugh. And then, when you calm down, it's like that, whew, then you actually get to think about it.
Yeah.
And go, okay, what can we do about this? Because the laughter kind of cleared your head.
The defense mechanisms come down.
Yeah, I feel it's like that cleansing breath, and you go, okay, yeah, that is ridiculous. We are doing this wrong. How can we do this better? Comedy does that. Carlin did that. So he is up there for me, for sure. A comic perhaps not as well known, Franklin Ajayi. He was known back in the day as the jazz comedian.
Okay.
He's like a comics comic. Like a lot of comedians know him. I love him to pieces. He wrote a wonderful book called Comic Insights. And the first part of the book, very small, is just his introduction. The rest of the book is interviews with his friends. His friends being George Carlin, Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock. These are his friends.
Yes.
So even if he's not a household name, he's known in the community. And that book is wonderful. I recommend it to not so much civilians, but I recommend it to other comics, because in all of these interviews, you find your style. It's like George Carlin wrote everything down. He never let an idea escape him. Sinbad, on the other hand, never wrote anything down. That is his claim. And so you realize there's kind of no right or wrong way to do comedies. You figure out who you are, and then you see who you're like, and it's kind of inspiring. Like, I love that George writes everything down, because so do I. Like, I have pieces of paper and notes everywhere. It's like, once I get an idea, I'm keeping it. You're mine. I'm very jealous. So I love Franklin for that reason. And I actually got a chance to work with him a few years ago. We had a project here in New York called the New York Underground Comedy Festival. Mm-hmm. And he was still in the country at the time, because he lives in Australia now. Very smart move. He was here in the States, and we invited him to do the festival, and he said yes. He's the festival headliner. And the first night, it was my job to go pick him up from where he was staying, to bring him to the venue. And I remember sitting in the car thinking, okay, just be normal. Don't freak out. Don't be a fangirl. Just be normal. And he gets his car. He's like, oh my God, I love your work. And I don't normally fangirl like that, but and he was so gracious and so kind and so laid back. Like, a lot of people came to the shows, and they brought his books. They brought old albums, and I'm talking albums, like in the square, and asking him to sign it. And he stayed for hours just signing stuff and talking to people. So I love when you can match the talent with also being a good and gracious person, because that doesn't always happen. Not always. I will throw just a couple more in here. I'm a big fan of Marsha Warfield. Marsha Warfield, if you guys were a fan, anybody listening was a fan of Night Court, that was Roz. Yes.
Oh yeah, okay,
yeah, there you go. Like that's what more people would know her from. But she was an actress, sketch actress, stand-up comedian. And I'm a fan of her because when I got introduced to her, I was a kid, when she was, in her career. And she was one of the first Black women I ever saw do stand-up. Like, I'm watching TV, it's all white guys, white women, Elaine Boozler, Diane Ford, love them. Then I see Marsha Warfield, and I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
What we do this? Like,
Yeah.
are you serious? And she just had this presence. She's on stage smoking a cigarette. She didn't give a damn. I was like, and it just hit my little brain like, oh my goodness, which tells you the power of role models.
Yes.
You know, and what it means to see someone that looks like you.
Yeah.
So years go by. We have social media. We have Facebook. She's on Facebook. I reach out. I'm like, hey, Marsha, I'm such a fan. You know, I love your work. She messages me back. Oh, I'm a fan of yours.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
I was floored. I was absolutely floored.
Yeah.
To me, that's one of the positives of social media.
Yes.
That you could reach out and have access to people whose work that you admire and possibly get them to respond.
Just like you have been gracious enough to respond to my email. So yes, thank you.
I cannot tell you how many opportunities people say, hey, do you want to share? Why not? I will throw in, just very not a stand-up, but just, you know, a comedic influence, the Carol Burnett show.
Yeah.
Oh, so funny. I remember watching them, you know, they do their sketches and they're cracking each other up. And I said, I want to work there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like when you're having so much fun that you're laughing with the people you're working with. I'm like, how is that a better time?
Yeah.
You know, at work. So that was very influential. And then, you know, shows like, and it's so hard. You have to put an asterisk next to this now, but the Cosby Show.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I listened to all kinds of Cosby's albums, you know, when I was a kid, you know. And,
right. Yeah. I mean, you listen back now and it's like, there are a couple of things that are cringeworthy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yikes.
That was a clue. We should have known, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So I could go on and on, but I won't. You had another question for me?
No, that's awesome. No. So I wanted to talk about your style a little bit. I went and listened to a couple of your comedy albums that are on Spotify. So people, you can just you can go listen to them. And I thought the couple of things I was struck by, one is that, you know, you could transform everything you said to today, right? You talked about race, religion, sexism, sex, education, wealth disparity, the lack of education in the Bush administration.
Wow, dude. You're my new publicist.
But you were so kind about it. It was so nice. I don't know if that's intentional. And I just,
yes.
The difference between 10 years ago and today, would you do that comedy the same way today?
I have to say no, only because I've changed as a person. You know, the artist, the art, whatever you're doing, you're supposed to grow and change. You know, so is that underlying kindness still there? Yeah, but so's my bite.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so there might be a little bit more sarcasm, there might be a little bit more harshness to the tone, but there's still the idea that you don't get people from shaking a finger in their face, whether you're doing it, you know, verbally or comedically. Mm-hmm. And I find people have come to my shows, and I remember one woman in particular, she was like, "Oh, I wanted to hate you." This tells you she had been drinking.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And you know, after the show, she goes, "I really want to hate you. You're so cute, and I was dressed nice, and all that." And then she started talking, and she goes, "I feel like we're friends now." And in my head, I'm like, "We are not friends, lady." But you know, so she had this preconceived notion that I had absolutely nothing to do with, mm-hmm. but I was able to win her over. You know, I've had people come up to me and go, "I don't agree with what you said." You know, this is back when I was doing more political humor, but man, it was funny.
Yeah. And
that's the point, man. If you can get people laughing, if they're not laughing, now it's a speech. Now you're trying to sell Amway, you know, that's a different gig. The overriding goal is to entertain. If you want to make political speeches, go run for office. You know, but if you want to prove your point with punchlines, those punchlines better be good. And you also have to stay within, you know, not stay within, but recognize your persona. Mm. You know, I would love to be, there's part of me that would still love to be a high energy comic. Somebody that just runs around the stage and stalks around and goes out into the audience and that's not me.
Yeah.
I'm more of the, you know, welcome to my parlor, the spider said to the fly.
Yeah, yes.
You know, and by the time my hooks are in you, you can't get away because I got you. but it'll be sweet. I promise.
So one of the things that I'm also struck by is, you have the book, which unfortunately I have not read. I plan on going to read it. The Dict jokes and
Yes.
the play on language. I have teenage daughters, and I tell this to them.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. But I tell this to them all the
man.
time. It's like, you actually had the joke. If you understand English well enough, you don't have to curse.
Yes.
And I'm always saying, the deepest burn is one in which the person does not realize they have been burned. But tell me about, like, how the English major in you came about and how that affects your comedy.
Well, this was I will say was actually inspired before then. There's a longer trajectory here.
Okay.
But the terrible side of my parents is that when I was reading something and came across a word that I didn't understand, these absolutely mean people would make me look the word up.
No Google or anything.
No, this was pre-Google. This was when you had to actually get up, go to the shelf, haul down the dictionary, open it up, and start flipping pages. And of course, if this was just a word you heard, it's like, well, how do you spell that? I mean, this was just awful. This was torture. And sometimes I didn't want to get up out of the chair.
Yeah.
And I would look at the word and try to figure out what it meant. Like, what does this word sound like it means? So I was usually wrong, but it's a fun game, that I sort of played with myself, and it continued into my adult. There are always going to be words. If you're reading the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, you're going to come across a word you don't know.
Yeah.
And yeah, mind you, we have our phones now, which I think is so awesome. we can look stuff up, but you still like, what does this sound like it means? And so when I would come across these words, I would post them on Facebook. Say, here's a word, it sounds like it means this.
Yeah.
And I did that, because I get on these little tangents, and I was doing that for a while. And somebody said, Leighann, you should write a book. And I'm like, what? And when I went back and I sort of collected all of them, like, oh wow, I do have enough for a book. I have two. One is, you can actually get the soft cover of. The other one is only available digital on Kindle.
Okay.
And what I loved about the book, was so much fun, is that I don't tell people this in the beginning. They discover it after they get the book, that I actually give you the real definition of the word, and it's part of speech. So you actually know what it means, and then what I think is funny in terms of what I think the word means.
Yeah. You're just sneaking in education.
Yes, I am completely sneaking in education. That's why teachers love it. So you actually get some knowledge there if you're paying attention, or you can just get the fun. Or I often say it's a great bathroom reader, because you start laughing, you're contracting the muscles. I'm helping.
Yes,
I'm helping move things along, and so. Just a funny side note, when I sent the book in, I found a proofreader, because if anybody out there who's writing a book, and you're self-publishing, spend the money, get a proofreader so that you have some credibility in your end product. So my proofreader sent me back notes, and as I'm going through, it's very professional. So okay, I would change this, I would do this, I would do this, and then the further along I'm going, I'm getting notes like, ha, that's so funny, I know where you're going there, listen, and I'm just cracking up.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I got my proofreader to start laughing.
Yes, that shows some talent, I think.
But I did go on to become my degree. I've started in finance, but that didn't work out. But my degree is in journalism and creative writing, and I've said before, I'm a word nerd. I love reading. Now it's audiobooks, but still. And I remember being very resentful of the fact that I was made to study for the SAT. We learned 2,000 words or whatever.
Yeah.
And then immediately after, so you grow up, you get a job, like, yeah, don't use big words. People don't like that. Keep it simple. And I'm like, no, I'm not keeping it simple. I'm keeping it really obtuse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and one of your comedy specials is called "I'm Not Urban, I'm Urbane," and then you joke about half the people don't get it.
No, right? Yeah, you put an E in, and again, that also goes back to proofreading. I worked in dark time of my life. I worked at a big multinational financial services firm, corporate communications department, assistant editor. And one of the first things my editor told me, she said they printed the annual report one year. And in the beginning it says, this document has been, read and, by certified public accountants. But they missed the L in public. which is not going to come up on spell check, boys and
Yes,
girls.
exactly. Nice.
So, yeah, nice. So I just love the idea of fun with language, and it's my way of sort of fighting against the dumbing down that we seem to be on right now for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, Leighann, I think I could spend hours talking with you, but I want to give you a chance to tell people how they can get in touch with you. How can they find your work?
Oh, sure. The big way, the overarching way to find me is my website, which is veryfunnylady.com. And that came about because my name is oddly spelled. There's a G and H in there, and it gets really tricky. My parents are having a very creative day. And I found at comedy shows, even if people enjoyed my work, they were like, what? What's her name? Listen, I don't care how many drinks you have. You can remember veryfunnylady.com.
There you go.
But I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Twitter. I'm even on, oh my God, on Pinterest for no reason. I'm on Pinterest for no reason whatsoever. But IG and YouTube and Twitter are really sort of my main points of entry. And I always post my shows or my products or things like that. And I'm one of those responsive users. So if you guys message me or something, I almost always message back unless it's super weird. I mean, as you can tell, you reached out, you found me, yes, you reached out to me, I replied.
That's right, yeah. Well, we'll have links in the show notes to all of your work so people can find you and they don't have to spell Leighann. Thank you, Leighann, so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, my dear, thank you. Thank you very much. This was a blast.
Final thoughts on the episode. Man, I had a good time talking with Leighann Lord. She is amazingly funny. I hope that you're okay with the fact that I left a lot of my maniacal laughter in. If I tried to edit it too much, it would have sounded wrong. But she cracks me up. I love her style of comedy. I love her spirit. I love what she's doing in the humanist community. I love what she's doing on Center for Inquiry's Point of Inquiry. I love what she's doing on People with Parents podcast. I just love Leighann Lord. A couple of quotes from Leighann that I thought were really significant. On secular grief, she says, everyone is there for you week one, and most of them are saying the absolute wrong thing. So while you were trying to grieve, you were also busy being angry. Ugh, I really felt this one. When I lost my mom, it was so difficult to go back to my hometown, to listen to all the believers in my family, to listen to pastor who conducted the funeral really patronize not only my mother, myself, and my family, as well as the fact that he knew that I was an atheist and just trying to evangelize me the whole time. It was an excruciating time, not the least of which having lost my mom, but being angry at the reaction of the people around me was just a killer. Leighann says, what they, Black Lives Matter, are doing, I believe, is the work and ideal of humanism, which is human beings realizing that they have a stake. You want to light a candle? That's great. We're still going to have to get in here and do this work. And to me, that is humanism. Human beings trying to be better humans, actually doing the work. That is amazing. That's why I wanted to have Leighann on to talk about the effect that humanism has in this moment in time and what it can say about racism in America. Just geeking out about comedy with Leighann. I appreciated that we probably grew up near the same time periods, listening to the same comics. I really appreciated her pointing out Marsha Warfield and how important it was for Leighann to see someone who looked like her up on stage doing comedy, and that she realized that Black women can do comedy, and that was a precursor for her to be able to go out and do what she does. I want to thank Leighann for being on the podcast, and mostly I want to thank Leighann for her gentleness with me. I am trying to have more difficult conversations about subjects that are hard to talk about. Race in America is on the top of that list. And in particular, as I was listening through the editing process, I realized with what naivete and my own bias that I even presented the question to her, attempting to present it in a hopeful light. And she was very kind and gentle with me to say, that the real world is a little grittier and more difficult. So again, I want to thank Leighann for her graciousness, her straightforwardness, the directness with which she approaches the issue, as well as allowing for someone like me to grow and learn from her. So thank you, Leighann. I appreciate it. And Leighann, just as a special note, if you're listening, I want to someday be worthy of the invite to the barbecue, but I've got some work to do before that will be the case. Thank you for being on the show and sharing your great insight. I will have links in the show notes for Leighann's work. I highly recommend that you listen to her comedy specials and check out her books. I'm going to be having a conversation with Dr. Anthony Pinn, also on the subject of race in America and how humanism does or does not address that. That will be coming up in the next few weeks. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Please join me in being graceful human beings. Time for some footnotes. The song is a track called Waves by Micaiah Beats. Please check out her music. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the podcast, here are the ways you can go about that. First, help promote it. The podcast's audience grows by word of mouth. If you found it useful or just entertaining, please pass it on to your friends and family. Post about it on social media so that others can find it. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This will help raise the visibility of our show. Join me on the podcast. Tell your story. Have you gone through a faith transition? You want to tell that to the world? Let me know and let's have you on. Do you know someone who needs to tell their story? Let them know. Do you have criticisms about atheism or humanism, but you're willing to have an honesty contest with me? Come on the show. If you have a book or a blog that you want to promote, I'd like to hear from you. Also, you can contribute technical support. If you are good at graphic design, sound engineering, or marketing, please let me know and I'll let you know how you can participate. And finally, financial support. There will be a link on the show notes to allow contributions which would help defray the cost of producing the show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, or you can send email to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. You can tweet at me at gracefulatheist, or you can just check out my website at gracefulatheist.wordpress.com. Get in touch and let me know if you appreciate the podcast. Well, this has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Grab somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.